Well, hello. Today is Friday, January 12th, and as you've seen at the beginning of the clip, it's not really going to be a weight-related video. So if you were looking for this to be a weight-related video, it's not. I'm just going to talk about the good old days. This is mostly for my grandchildren. Hopefully, in the future, they'll look at this and they'll see what a different life that I had growing up than they had growing up, and the reason I bring this up is it struck me yesterday when my grandkid, well, we have, which I'm hoping that when you're seeing this in the future, that you still do, is we have family dinners. And I do them once a week, and it's just to keep my family close and just so we can have a good time. We had such a good time last night. We laughed so hard that Jimmy almost choked on his food, and not that that's funny, but it was just, we were just laughing about something, and then Danny brought up something, and he started laughing before he could tell the story, and then we were all laughing at Danny getting so much amusement out of what he was going to say. We laughed so hard, we all had tears rolling down our face, and by the time we all composed ourselves, Danny refused to tell us because he said it wouldn't have been as funny as what just happened. So we never know what Danny was going to talk about. But anyway, it got me to thinking about how things are so much different now than they were when I was a child. And that was a long time ago, because when I'm filming this, I'm 67 years old. And I had such a different childhood than the kids that have nowadays. When my grandkids showed up for dinner last night, they were on their iPads. It was just, and I have nothing against an iPad because I'm always on the iPad. And by the time you watch, in the future, when they watch this, there'll be something even better than an iPad. But I just remember that we went outside to play. We didn't stay in the house. The only time we were in the house is if it was raining. We even went out in the snow. I remember building snow forts and having snowball fights. I can't remember the last time I saw kids outside having a snowball fight. When my kids were little, they had snowball fights, but nowadays I don't ever see anybody having a snowball fight. I don't see anybody building snow forts. I remember when we put our boots on, we'd put the bread wrappers on our feet because it would make the shoe slide in easier to the boot. And we wore leggings, or snow pants as they're called now, to school. We didn't have snow days. If we got too much snow, we walked through the ruts in the street till we got to school. I don't ever remember having a day where the school was closed due to the weather. It never did. We didn't have a cell phone. We had one phone, and it was in the kitchen. And everybody could hear your conversation because the kitchen was the hub of the house. When I was growing up, we did have a dining room, but the dining room was just for company. We always ate in the kitchen, around the kitchen table. The rule was you had to sit at the kitchen table to have your dinner, and you didn't take it off into another room, or you didn't reheat it because we didn't have microwaves back then. You couldn't decide at the last minute, well, I'm going to have a pot pie for dinner. No, you had to know that a couple hours ahead of time because you had to put it in the oven, and then you couldn't buy it because back then frozen food was just coming out, and it was really nasty. It wasn't good, and so you'd have to make your own homemade pot pie right from scratch. We had milk delivered to the house because it was in Michigan. We had Twin Pines, and they would come and they deliver the milk right to your house. We had a bakery, Awry's, A-W-R-E-S, Y-S rather, and they would come, and I remember they'd come in with this, he'd carry the cart and he'd push a button and the bottom would slide out, and then you'd get your choice of like donuts or coffee cakes. We very rarely got that. We only got that if we had company, and the company ate that first. If there was leftovers, we got some. But it was just the excitement of knowing that we might be able to get that, you know. What else did we have? We had a fruit truck that used to come down to, not even a fruit truck, a fruit wagon, fruits and vegetables. And I remember the guy used to pull it on a horse. His wagon, pull it on a horse. The horse used to pull the wagon, and on the back he'd have all the fruits and vegetables, and he'd come in. That's the way you got your fresh fruits and vegetables. If a fruit wasn't in season, guess what? You didn't get it because it wasn't shipped in from all over the world. You only got what was available at the time. So in the summer, you didn't have a lot of fresh fruits. You had apples and oranges, and that was it. Maybe some grapefruits, and then in the summer, you look forward to the peaches and the plums because that was the only time you were going to get it. Back then, you only had one TV if you were lucky enough to have a TV, and it was in black and white. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, they'd play the national anthem, they'd show a flag, and then the TV would be turned off and it wouldn't come back on until 7 o'clock the next morning. So you had nothing to watch during the night. It was just a different time. It really was. You just, there was no VCRs, so if you didn't see the program when it was on, you missed it. I remember when I was dating Jim that the big show back then was The Fugitive, and every week I would have to tell him that if we're going out, I have to be home in time to see The Fugitive because I want to know if he's going to catch that one-armed man. And it was so different because they didn't have like a spring season or a fall season or the winter finale. They had 39 weeks of episodes, and if you saw it, you saw it, and if you didn't, you didn't. That was it. I mean, you can go back now and see them because they have them on the internet. There was no internet. Forget that. There was no internet. If somebody was to call, you couldn't just call anybody anywhere in the world. You had to dial the operator, and the operator had to place the call. And to save money, you always called person to person because you wanted to make sure the person was there. Because if the person wasn't there, why waste the money? Because you were going to get charged no matter what. Trying to think. The ice cream man used to come down the street, the Good Humor. Now they have the trucks that fly by here like 100 miles an hour and they play that old crappy music that just drives you insane. But you'd hear the bell because he'd bring ding, 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 and you'd hear it and you'd go running you'd just come running out because you so want to have it. And half the time the truck drove by right past you because you didn't have the money because, you weren't rich. You didn't know it, but you weren't rich, and so that's why you didn't always get ice cream. The only time we got desserts when we ate dinner was on Sundays, after Sunday meal. We had chicken, which was expensive. Now chicken's cheap, but back then it was expensive, and that would be our Sunday dinner, and we'd eat that probably at 1 o'clock in the afternoon because we'd just have sandwiches or cereal for dinner later on in the day. Probably now I see it's just to offset the cost of what the chicken cost. What else did we not have that you guys all have? It's just, we would go outside and play. We would play Duck, Duck, Goose, Red Light, Green Light, Mother May I, tag, frozen tag, hide and go seek. We would go out down to the park and just play a pickup game of baseball. No uniforms, no umpires. Right field was out because you never had enough people to cover the right field area. And once a week, the Parks and Recreation would come, and they'd have little projects that you could do. I remember making a change purse one week, and just fun things. It was just so much fun. When we went to school, we had gym class every day, and we had art twice a week. We had music. We had so many different classes that now they say they don't have the money for, so I don't understand that. Because I can't think that we pay less taxes than we did back then. Your family only had one car, so if you wanted the car, you'd have to get up early with your mother to drive your dad to work so that you'd have the car, and then you'd have to go back and you'd have to wait because why should he have to wait after working 8 hours for you to come and pick him up? You can sit there and you can wait for him. So I remember we used to do that. Christmas didn't start until Thanksgiving when Santa Claus came in the parade. You never saw Christmas decorations up before then. And then you look forward to going and looking at all the lights on the houses and stuff, going to the stores and seeing how they decorated their windows. It was just such a different time. It really was. You would go outside at night because you didn't have air conditioning, and you'd sit on the porch, and you'd actually know your neighbors. I knew my neighbors, Mrs. McQuaid, Mrs. Hubert, Mrs. Quirk, Mrs. Bush, Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Samaro, Mrs. Colella, Mrs. Caillou. I knew them all. They knew me. You never got in trouble because, I'm going to tell your mother, because everybody then. Nowadays you can't say anything to anybody because you're going to get so offended that you said something bad about your child. But back then you were afraid that if a neighbor saw you that you did something wrong, that they were going to let you know. We used to earn our own money, not just got an allowance handed to us. We had specific jobs that we had to do. And we'd have to wash dishes or dry the dishes because we didn't have a dishwasher. You washed the dishes, and you had a very small refrigerator, and it was just enough to fit the food for the day because it wasn't even called a refrigerator. It was called an ice box. Although I had a when I was growing up, I had a refrigerator. But when I was very small, my mother said we had an ice box. I don't have a memory of that, but I remember that she said that. And that was just a refrigerator that you put a block of ice in, and then when the ice melted, you had to go buy another block of ice. Otherwise, your food would go bad. Trying to think of there's so many different things in my life is so much different. It was a good childhood. I had so much fun. If you wanted to earn money, you'd go out and shovel snow, or you'd go and rake leaves. Nobody ever tells you. You didn't rake leaves with a rake, like a leaf blower. You raked the leaves, and when you got done, you swept them in a pile, and you could burn them. It was so nice to smell that smell. It's such a nice smell of burning leaves in the fall. It just brings back memories of the fall. In the winter, when you shoveled the snow, they didn't have snow blowers. You had a shovel, and you shoveled the snow. So it was just so much. I know I keep saying it was so different, but I really do feel sorry for them that they're missing out on all of this. You didn't get a ride to school. I remember walking to school in the rain. I had an umbrella, and that's what you did. Nowadays, if you want to pick up your child, people get there 45 minutes beforehand so that they can get a front row spot so their poor little child doesn't have to walk an extra 5 or 6 steps. I walked almost a mile to school. I know, mile uphill all the way. It really wasn't. But I did walk to school, and I walked in all kinds of weather. Like I said, if it was too much snow, you just walked in the ruts. It was just, and there was so much more, and I know I'm going to sound like an old person, but there was just so much more respect for everybody. Not to say that there weren't bad people, and there weren't racists, and there weren't, bad bullies and stuff like that. But if you were a bully back then, you knew it right off. You knew that James Cowie was the bully. You just knew that. But nowadays, with the secrecy of the internet, all these kids are getting ripped on with what I call cowardly bullies, because they hide behind the internet, and they can say whatever they want. And I'm sure I'm going to get some dislikes on this. Once again, a cowardly bully. Because if you really don't like what I'm saying, then just put it in the comments below and put your name on there. But they don't. They just hit the dislike button. I don't really care. You can hit the dislike button as many times as you want. I really don't care. You're not going to bully me. You're just not. And I refuse to let anybody bully anybody. So if I see someone alone, I'm the grandma that's going to go and say, stop bullying. But like I said, I had a great childhood. I really did. I would never change not one bit of it. Not for anything in the world. I really wouldn't. My only wish would be that you could live a month in my life as growing up as a child and see how much fun it was. It really was. The anticipation of anything, your birthdays, the holidays, company coming for dinner. When someone rang the doorbell, you didn't have to worry, was it a telemarketer or a Jehovah's Witness or somebody that wanted you to fix something on your house. It could just be just a nice neighbor down the street that baked some extra cookies and wanted to bring you some cookies or something. To me, it was a better time. And that really makes me sound old, but to me, it was a better time. So my wish for you, my grandchildren, is that you have a strong faith in God, that you're living your best life possible, and that you know that your grandma loves you so much. So my wish to you is that you have as much love in your life as I had growing up in my life, and as much love as you've given me throughout my whole life. All right, that's it. I babbled on too long. I love you guys. Well, one thing you got to learn about your grandma, she makes mistakes. I meant to say, in the winter, you only got apples and oranges. I always made a mistake, but I always like to correct it.